My name is Lucinda, and I am 36 years old. I came home from work that evening exhausted, my feet aching, my mind still tangled in deadlines and emails, expecting nothing more dramatic than reheated leftovers and silence. But the moment I unlocked my front door, something felt wrong. A strange sense that the house no longer belonged to me, that the air itself had been disturbed, and as I stepped inside, I heard voices, familiar, confident, and completely out of place, coming from my living room. And when I turned the corner, my heart dropped because there they were, my brother and his wife, sitting comfortably on my couch with papers spread across my coffee table, gesturing at my walls and windows as if they were already owners. And before I could even ask what they were doing, my sister-in-law laughed and said something that still rings in my ears. Something about renovations and how nice it would look once it's theirs. And I froze because I came home from work to find my brother and his wife inside my house and talking about renovations once it's theirs. And in that moment, confusion turned into a cold, creeping anger that crawled up my spine. I asked them calmly, at first, what they meant, trying to believe this was some kind of tasteless joke. But my brother barely looked up, just shrugged and said our parents had agreed this was the best solution for everyone, as if my consent was irrelevant, as if the years I spent saving, sacrificing, and signing every legal document myself meant nothing. And while they talked over me, pointing at my kitchen and complaining about the cabinets, memories flooded back of all the times my family had treated me like the extra child, the one expected to give, to bend, to stay quiet for the sake of peace. I bought this house alone after my divorce, after rebuilding my life from scratch, after nights of crying into unpaid bills and mornings of forcing myself to keep going. And now they sat there acting like it was already a gift wrapped for them. And when I demanded an explanation, my brother finally stood up and said, our parents felt he deserved stability more than I did, that he had a family to think about, and that I was strong enough to start over again. Those words slicing deeper than he probably realized. I told them to leave, my voice shaking but firm. Yet instead of apologizing, my sister-in-law smirked and said I was being dramatic, that the paperwork would be sorted soon, and that I should just accept it gracefully. And that's when I realized this wasn't a misunderstanding, it was a plan. One that had been discussed behind my back while I worked late hours to pay the mortgage on a house they wanted to take. The door opened again not long after, and my parents walked in like they owned the place too. No surprise on their faces, only irritation. And my mother sighed as if I were a problem she was tired of dealing with, saying we needed to talk like adults. And then my father dropped the sentence that changed everything, that they expected me to sign the house over to my brother because family comes first. And I remember laughing, a hollow disbelieving sound, because I realized family only came first when it benefited them. I refused, clearly, repeatedly, telling them the house was legally mine, that they had no right to decide this for me, and my brother's face hardened, the warmth replaced by entitlement. And he said if I didn't cooperate, things could get ugly, a threat disguised as concern. And suddenly the people who were supposed to protect me felt like strangers standing in my home, measuring it for their own use. I asked them all to leave, again, louder this time, my hands shaking as I pointed to the door. And when they finally did, they left behind more than silence. They left behind the realization that they had already decided my role in their story was to lose, to give up, to stay quiet. And as I locked the door behind them, my house felt different. Not safe, not warm, but violated, like a line had been crossed that could never be uncrossed. That night I barely slept, replaying every word, every look, realizing this wasn't just about property, it was about control, about years of being dismissed and underestimated. And by morning, I knew one thing with absolute clarity. I would not be erased from my own life, no matter how much pressure they applied. And this was only the beginning of a fight I never asked for but was no longer willing to avoid. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity that surprised even me. The kind that comes after betrayal strips away denial, and I knew that pretending this would blow over was no longer an option. Because by noon my parents were already calling, leaving voicemails filled with disappointment, guilt, and thinly veiled warnings about how I was tearing the family apart. And when my brother texted me asking when I planned to sign the papers, as if my refusal the night before had been nothing more than a tantrum, something inside me snapped into place, calm and unmovable. And I realized that protecting myself was no longer selfish, it was necessary. I gathered every document related to the house. The deed, the mortgage statements, the insurance. Every proof that this place was legally and undeniably mine. And as I sat at my kitchen table, the same table they had leaned over discussing renovations, once it's theirs, the anger returned sharper than before. Because I came home from work to find my brother and his wife inside my house and talking about renovations, once it's theirs. Then my parents demanded I sign the house over to him. I refused and pressed charges, and saying it out loud for the first time felt like reclaiming my voice. When my brother showed up later that day without warning, letting himself in with a spare key I had forgotten existed, the situation escalated quickly. His tone aggressive, his entitlement unmistakable, and when I told him to leave immediately, he laughed and said I was bluffing, that our parents would make sure this went his way. And in that moment, fear flickered through me, not because he was stronger, but because I finally saw how far they were willing to go. I called the police, my hands steady despite my racing heart, and when officers arrived, my brother's confidence evaporated, replaced by outrage and disbelief that I would do this to family. But family hadn't stopped them from trespassing, from planning to take what wasn't theirs, and as I explained everything calmly, providing proof, watching the scene unfold from a distance, I felt something shift. A weight lifting as authority finally stood on my side. My parents arrived soon after, frantic and furious, accusing me of humiliation, of betrayal, of choosing law over blood. But the officer's firm explanation made it clear that emotions didn't override ownership, and when my brother was told he needed to leave immediately and that charges for trespassing were being considered, my mother burst into tears, not for me, but for the consequences they never believed would touch them. Pressing charges wasn't easy. It wasn't done out of spite. It was done because boundaries had been shattered and threats had been made, because my safety and future mattered. And as the paperwork was filed, I felt both grief and relief. Mourning the family I thought I had while finally standing up for the woman I had become, the fallout was swift and brutal. Relatives called to shame me. Messages flooded in about forgiveness and duty, but none of them offered to repay the years of sacrifice I poured into that house. None of them acknowledged how violated I felt. And slowly, I stopped responding, choosing peace over noise, truth over comfort. In the weeks that followed, I changed the locks, installed cameras, and for the first time since the divorce, I felt truly at home again, not because the house was untouched, but because it was protected. And when the legal process concluded with my ownership reaffirmed and clear warnings issued against further harassment, the silence from my family became permanent, painful, but honest. I learned that sometimes the price of self-respect is distance, and that blood ties mean nothing without mutual respect. And while I never imagined my life would include police reports and court documents tied to my own parents and sibling, I also never imagined how strong I could be when forced to choose myself. Today, when I walk through my living room, I don't see the place where they planned renovations. I see the space where I finally reclaimed control, where fear gave way to resolve, and where a woman who was always expected to give learned to stand firm instead. And if my story resonates with you, if you've ever been pressured to sacrifice yourself for the comfort of others, remember that your boundaries are valid. Your voice matters, and your life is yours to protect. And if you want more real, powerful stories like this, stories of justice, courage, and standing up when it matters most, make sure you subscribe to the channel and stay with us for what comes next.